Paul, some very smart physicists who are also believers and theologians wrestle with the idea of how could God interact with the world and posit bottoms up from the quantum level or tops down from the consciousness level. A lot of interesting thoughts and mechanisms because they need a God to interact. How do you look at it?
I've always had a problem about a God who is a miracle-working super being, like a cosmic magician. I will often say that there are no miracles except the miracle of nature itself. And so for me, if I use the word God, which I'm always very careful about because it carries so many different meanings to different people, it is in terms of the meaningfulness of the whole package, not in terms of a being who's sort of meddling from time to time. But I realize that many people, including some scientists, would like the idea of a God who intervenes in history actively, a person or a super person who is involved in the day-to-day affairs of the world.
Well, certainly interacting with human life.
Interacting with human life, maybe through prayer, through working the occasional miracles or something. Now, that, to me, speaking as a scientist, that's really pretty horrible, the idea of this God sort of intervening from time to time. And I wouldn't want that. And I think it strikes many scientists who are also believers as pretty horrible too. And so people have tried to find ways of getting around that, perhaps more subtle ways in which God's purposes could be enacted through the processes of nature rather than in contradiction to them. There's a nice analogy here because the old problem of the mind and the body. You see, how do I make things happen in the world? Well, I move objects around and so on in accordance with my wishes, and that's a bit of a mystery too. So maybe God can act in the world in a way that is no more mysterious than a human being acting in the world. So if there is a way in which mind and matter can get along together without breaking any laws, well, that's one way for God to do it. So that's a sort of cheap way out. Perhaps there can be a God who can act in the world in the same way that human minds can act in the world.
Because if you don't have that, then you would, I think, not to characterize you, would be called a deist, which means you have a God who set it all in motion, planned it all beautifully, sculpted it artistically, elegant, wound it up, and then went away.
Yeah. So the word deist has pejorative connotations. I think a lot of people feel that that's not a God that they would want. This is not theism. This type of deism is like the absentee landlord God. Part of the problem with that view of deism is it's rooted in the old Newtonian notion of time. That this would be a God who sort of sat around for all eternity, then decided to make a universe, made it, set it going, and then went to work on something less ambitious.
Or more interesting.
Or more interesting. But once you get away from that notion that time is somehow there, if time is part of the physical universe, and that this being is sort of outside of time, then it seems to me that difference between theism and deism isn't quite so severe. But nevertheless, the issue is there a way in which a God or gods or some super being or a super mind or whatever it is that is outside the universe can act in the universe and make a difference? Because, if there's a God who makes no difference, why do we need such a God? I look with interest at what my colleagues attempt. Now, the crude way is just getting God to overrule the laws of physics, intervene and break those same laws. A more subtle way is to have the laws providing gaps, loopholes in which God could gain causal purchase. Now, quantum physics, at first sight, does seem to provide such gaps because quantum physics tells us that at the atomic and subatomic level, there's an inherent indeterminism in the way matter behaves. And
but that's a probabilistic...
It's a probabilistic thing. So God sort of loading the quantum dice.
God sort of shifting the bell curve in terms of probability distributions.
That's right. So, I'm not advocating this. I'm just simply observing that this is what some of my colleagues feel. Now, at least that has the virtue of not actually breaking the laws, but working sort of within the natural looseness of those laws. But for me, this has never really been an issue because I've never liked the idea of a God who just sort of pops up from time to time.
You're very comfortable with the existence of meaning and purpose in a universe in which the God built all of the elegance and majesty into the originating laws to have them go on their own, so to speak, without
Right.
her active intervention.
Yeah, let me put this bluntly, because this comes up so often in conversation. Now, supposing I were an omnipotent being, and you said, well, you can have any sort of universe you want. And I think, well, that's nice. I'll have a universe like this. I'd like some planets in there, and I'd like some ocean, and I wave a wand, there's the ocean, and let's have some living beings. Oh, no, that's not quite right. Rub those out. Start again. Dead easy. If I'm omnipotent, I can just conjure it all into being. I couldn't respect such an omnipotent being because there's nothing clever about doing that. But now imagine the challenge is this. What I'm told is I've got to come up with some deep mathematical principles, something of that sort, and I've got to let it go, and I've got to let the universe generate its own life, its own self-awareness, and let the whole thing self-organize, self-complexify. And I'm not allowed to meddle and tinker and just make things happen just by fiat. That's much, much harder. And so when I look at the universe as a self-generating, self-observing, self-complexifying thing, that to me looks really deeply ingenious. That looks really clever. Whereas a cosmic magician looks to me like just a magician, just a conjurer. So I can't have much respect for such a being.
But in that process, don't you lose something? Don't you lose the great theistic vision of a personal God who is aware of human life and troubles and suffering and comforting, and even indeed a future life, an afterlife, a resurrection?
Yes, you do lose it. I have to say that what I'm talking about is something which is abstract, which is beyond day-to-day human affairs. It's something in which human life is not central to the workings of the cosmos. It's part of the general evolution of life and mind in the universe. So from that point of view, human life has a significance, but we're not at the center of the universe, and we're not at the center of the attention of a God who is specifically concerned with human beings as opposed to the whole cosmic scheme.
There wouldn't be any implication for an afterlife.
I think there would be no implication. I've always found it very curious that the afterlife is tied to God. We can imagine an afterlife and no God, and we can imagine a God and no afterlife.
Sure.
They go together in most of the world religions, but there's no logical connection whatever between them. So I see no reason that you couldn't have some sort of afterlife. In principle, it's a logically possible thing, whether there was a God or no God.
But that means that you have meaning and purpose in your universe, even though you don't have a personal God, whereas most fundamental physicists would see the whole venture as rather pointless.
I think it's true that most physicists would look at the same facts as me and say, well, they can't discern anything like a meaning or a purpose or a point to it all. And that's right. So it really boils down to one of these arguments, is the bottle half full or is it half empty? Because we're all in agreement on the facts, and it's the interpretation we put on that. And my interpretation has always been that I think that there is a coherent scheme of things, which is like a purpose. But we have to be really careful with what we mean by these words.
Sounds like both the pointless theoretical physicists and the personal God theologians would each of them criticize you.
Yes, I've always felt that I'm in an uneasy position in the middle, getting sniped at from both sides, that my atheistic scientific colleagues say, well, why are you dabbling around in these God issues? And conventional believers of whatever religion seem to think that what I'm saying is deeply heretical. But I have to say that I've tried to be good-natured about this, and also my own ideas have changed over the years. So what I'm trying to do is set out honestly the way I see the world. And I have to say that I have done pretty okay, that I haven't had too much hate mail.
Well, reality is reality. It shouldn't be dependent upon some democratic vote. It is what it is, and it is the great hallmark of humanity to seek it.
It's also an essential part of science that we don't decide in advance what is the case. We don't decide, there's no God or there's some particular sort of God. But it seems to me that what we have to do is look at the scientific facts and draw interpretations from that. And as the facts change, so those interpretations may change. And I'm sure if we were having this discussion in another couple of hundred years, we would see things differently.